In the summer of 1983, Hong Kong police received a phone call. The caller claimed to be an employee of Bumiputra Malaysia Finance, reporting that their assistant general manager and auditor, Jalil Ibrahim, had gone missing and was possibly in danger, so he asked the police for help in locating him. The police quickly opened an investigation, but how they could find out was that Jalil was from Malaysia and had come to Hong Kong temporarily for work. That was it. Just when the case seemed to hit a dead end, another call came in on July 18th. This time, it was from an elderly woman saying she had found a man's body in a banana grove. The police quickly rushed to the scene and the autopsy revealed the man had been dead for about 24 hours and had suffocated. The murder weapon, a hotel bathrobe belt, found next to him. But there were no ID or personal items on the body except for a Malaysian coin in his pants pocket. Malaysia? Could this be the same Jalil who'd gone missing a few days earlier? Sure enough, after a comparison, it was Jalil. According to his colleague, he had arrived at the Hilton Hotel that day, preparing to approve a $4 million loan for Hong Kong's Carrian group. But in the middle of it, he received a call from his company and was told to go to room 609 at the Regent Hotels for a business meeting. Soon after, the colleague got 2 more calls from Jalil. The first one told him not to wait and to sign off on the loan himself, but shortly after, a second call said, "Wait a minute," then abruptly hung up. That was the last anyone heard from him. The police then traced the hotel, where they found that the guest on that day was a Malaysian man named Mai Fuxiang. According to the security footage, on the afternoon of July 18th, Mai was seen dragging a suitcase and taking a taxi that headed toward a banana grove in Tai Po. Then this seemed suspicious. But Mai claimed he was on a business trip on behalf of Malaysia's Ministry of Finance. He admitted to have met Jalil, but insisted he didn't kill him. Then he mentioned something important. Jalil was killed by George Tan Song Jin, the chairman of Carrian Group. And that's when everything took a turn. No one expected that the death of an auditor would lead to Hong Kong's biggest business scandal, involving a massive sum of 6.6 billion HKD. And yet, the main culprit was only sentenced to 3 years in prison. If you're curious about how this all went down, stick around, and don't forget to follow my channel. I'll be back every Saturday night with more. Who was George Tan Song Jin? Why would a CEO go after a small-time auditor like Jalil? There's definitely a lot of deep financial interest behind all of this. But before we dive into the investigation, let's take a look at how Carrian Group got started. Maybe the answer will become clear on its own. Let's rewind to the 1980s in Hong Kong. Back then, Hong Kong was in the middle of an economic transformation, with a booming trade environment and a prime location, quickly becoming the world's 3rd largest financial and trade hub. Naturally, this kind of opportunity attracted a lot of people, and one of them was George Tan Song Jin. Actually, George wasn't exactly from humble beginnings. He had studied civil engineering at the University of London, and after graduating, he joined a small company. But things didn't go well, and that company went bankrupt. With nowhere else to turn, George decided to take a chance in Hong Kong. Soon after, George joined a company called Ixon Realty Limited. He was a natural at networking, and it didn't take long before he became well-liked by his boss, Chung Ching-man. Soon, he was in a strong position within the company. Then came the boom in Hong Kong's real estate market. Seeing an opportunity, George capitalized on it. Through his connection with Chung, he bought a residential building for $2.5 million, and just a year later, he sold it to the government for $6.2 million. That's a $3.7 million profit in no time. Ecstatic about his success, George decided it was time to start his own business. In 1976, George teamed up with Chung to form a company called Carrian Pest Specialist Limited. Initially, the company focused on real estate-related services, but as competition grew fiercer, George realized this approach wouldn't lead to long-term development. So he convinced Chung to help him establish Carrian Group Limited, a company focused entirely on real estate development. In 1977, George met a finance manager named Java from Bumiputra Finance. which allowed him to network with top-level people at Bumiputra Bank. 2 years later, George borrowed 5 million HKD from this finance, and that's when he started playing the capital game. In the same year, Carrian Group launched 8 luxury villas in Stanley, selling for 8 million each, double the market price. Yet despite the high price, these villas sold out fast, putting Carrian Group on the social map. Just a few months later, this company acquired 52.3% of a listed company called My Home Enterprise for 4.3 billion HKD and renamed it Carrian Properties. You probably guessed what he was up to. Yup, he was preparing to use My Home as a vehicle for a backdoor listing. But George wasn't satisfied with that little success. In early 1980, he applied for multiple loans from Bumiputra Finance, then spent 1 billion to buy one of the most famous office buildings in Hong Kong, the Golden Gate Commercial Building. Just 10 months later, he sold it to a company called By Lamson Group and made a profit of nearly 700 million. When the news broke, the financial world was stunned. Carrian Group's stock price shot up from 5.9 HKD per share to 17.9 HKD, attracting a flood of investors eager to cash in on the rising star. The development of Carrian Group is truly shocking. But from an outsider's perspective, though, such rapid growth often comes with huge risks and hidden agendas. In fact, many people also questioned where Carrian Group's money was really coming from. Then George released a statement saying all the funds were from his own private consortium. He didn't specify who these consortiums were, but soon, rumors started circulating that he had ties to the Philippine royal family, the Soviet banks, or even some political elites. However, George never denied these whispers, and it only added to his mystique, making more and more people believe in him and want to invest in Carrian stocks. In any case, the Golden Gate deal turned George into a legend. At the peak of its success, Carrian Group had become a global, diversified conglomerate with business in real estate, finance, construction, tourism, restaurants, and more. Just when everyone thought it would continue to shine, the bubble burst. In 1982, the global economic downturn hit and Hong Kong's real estate market was severely affected. People became hesitant to spend or buy property, which caused serious cash flow problems for George. At this point, Chong, who had worked with George for many years, saw the writing on the wall and decided to cut his losses. He started quietly gathering evidence of George's financial irregularities and threatened to expose everything to the public. After several rounds of negotiations, George eventually agreed to give Chong a hefty severance payment, which only deepened Carrian Group's financial crisis. But George was a master at marketing himself. He continued to announce to the public that the company was making a profit of 269 million HKD and that they planned to pay out a dividend of 0.12 HKD per share. Yet just a month later, Carrian Group suddenly canceled the dividend payout. The sharp-eyed shareholders immediately realized the company was facing serious financial problems, but it was already too late. In 1983, Carrian Group's stock price plummeted like a roller coaster, and it announced that 3 of its listed companies would suspend trading. And just as this company was sinking into financial chaos, the police came knocking. Alright, let's get back to Jalil's death. After the investigation, it was found that Jalil was part of Bumiputra Bank in Malaysia, which had opened a branch, Bumiputra Malaysia Finance, in Hong Kong to expand its business. As we mentioned above, Bumiputra Finance was a company providing Carrian Group with large loans. As Carrian bubbles burst, the bank's headquarters realized there might be some internal collusion between them. So they sent Jalil to Hong Kong to conduct an investigation and audit the books. Jalil was known for being very upright and extremely serious about his work. Before coming to Hong Kong, he had already suspected that Carrian Group was built on a foundation of false property and had refused to approve a $4 million loan to them. Ironically, after Jalil's death, the deputy manager at the finance was able to sign off on that very loan. Given the 2 phone calls, it seems likely that Jalil had received death threats. After refusing to compromise, he was silenced. Then, the police turned their attention to Mai Fuxiang. Surveillance footage showed that on the 18th, Mai was seen dragging a heavy suitcase out of the hotel room, even asking the hotel staff to help him load it onto the taxi. The taxi then took him to a car rental company in Hanhong, where he rented a Japanese brand sedan. Then he loaded the suitcase into the car and drove to a banana plantation in Taipo. But when the police confronted Mai, he claimed he had only delivered a suitcase to the banana plantation. He didn't kill Jalil. The real killer was a North Korean man named Xie. Mai further stated that the North Korean had told him that it was George Tan Song-jin, the boss of Carrian Group, who had ordered the hit. However, without solid evidence, and also the assassin was nowhere to be found, the police couldn't just take his word for it and accuse George. In the end, only Mai was convicted and sentenced to death in 1984. But Jalil's death wasn't the end of it. The day before the trial for murder, Carrian Group's lawyer, Wen Shubao, was found drowned in his own swimming pool. The strange part was that a nylon rope was tied around his neck, with the other end attached to a cement manhole cover, pulling him under the water. The odd nature of his death immediately made the police suspect foul play. But during the investigation, they found 3 suicide notes left by Wen, which stated that no matter what happened with George's case, his reputation would never be restored. It would affect both his law firm and his family. In the end, the police had to conclude Wen had committed suicide. With the mysterious death of the auditor and lawyer on September 18, 1983, the police decided to launch a full investigation into Carrian Group. The truth, however, was truly shocking. It turned out that Carrian's property was built on one lie after another. During the company's development over the years, Carrian had used its connections with Bumiputra Finance to secure large loans to buy properties, which were then falsely sold. We mentioned earlier the 8 luxurious villas, right? But in fact, they were purchased by a subsidiary of Carrian. The purpose was to create fake transactions to present an illusion of booming business. The later acquisition of the Golden Gate commercial building was the same, where Carrian partnered with a company called Lamson Group to artificially inflate the price and trick the Malaysian government into purchasing it. Even parts of their stock purchases were done internally by the company. So once Carrian could no longer borrow, the whole lie collapsed. And to cover up their tracks, they decided to get rid of the source of the problem, Jalil. Further investigations revealed discrepancies between the loans Bumiputra Finance had provided to Carrian and Carrian's internal accounts, clearly indicating that George had embezzled a significant amount. As a result, on October 3, 1983, the police arrested several individuals involved, including George Tan Song-jin. In October, Carrian Group officially announced its liquidation. The results showed that its total debt amounted to 10.6 billion, of which 4.6 billion was owed to Bumiputra Malaysia Finance, and the remainder included the hard-earned savings of many shareholders. This collapse had a devastating effect on many investors, causing them to lose everything, leading to mental breakdowns and, in some cases, even suicides. The police then conducted a 3-year investigation. At the same time, the Malaysian government sent a commission to investigate. Eventually, the commission reported Bumiputra Malaysia Finance corruption to Hong Kong's Independent Commission Against Corruption, which began its own investigation. What no one expected, though, was that this investigation would drag on for 13 years. During this time, George exploited every legal loophole, questioning the authenticity of V-check and stalling the investigation. Meanwhile, the ICAC found that the case was practically unsolvable. The related documents piled up so high that they filled 47 filing cabinets. The number of investigators increased from an initial 12 to 40, with some even driving to suicide due to the immense pressure. I doubt if it was really a suicide. As the investigation deepened, George couldn't sit idly by. He secretly sent people into the archive to destroy evidence, making it even harder to gather the necessary information. Of course, during this time, the police officially charged George with fraud, but it was essentially meaningless. Later, the case was litigated for over 9 months, with court records reaching more than 25,000 pages and 104 witnesses testifying. Both the prosecution and defense poured in nearly 200 million HKD in funds. In the end, in September 1987, the presiding judge ruled to release George and the other defendants in court due to repeated charges and insufficient evidence. And 2 of the defendants even received 36 million HKD in compensation. The reality of the situation was absurd. George not only had enormous financial power, but he had also secretly bought off many people. Many suspected that the presiding judge was one of those individuals. In 1988, after the Carrian Group case, this judge resigned and left Hong Kong. However, in November of that year, he died in a sudden traffic accident in Cyprus. This led to suspicions that he had been murdered to cover up illicit dealings during the trial. Ultimately, in 1994, 11 years after the liquidation of Carrian Group, the ICAC filed charges against George and other involved individuals for providing illegal benefits, bribery, and conspiracy to defraud. It wasn't until September 27, 1996, that George admitted to 2 counts of conspiracy of defraud and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. But due to severe heart disease, he was allowed to serve his sentence in the medical detention ward, and ultimately, he was released after just a year and a half. Afterward, he lived a semi-retired life in seclusion, never appearing in the public eye again. Although those involved were eventually punished, I don't think this outcome can be considered entirely satisfying. The punishment was too light, and after his release, George was fully capable of living a life of luxury until his death. In his long life, the 3 years in prison were merely a small setback, but the losses faced by the bank and the shareholders were irreparable. Personally, I do admit George was a talented businessman. If he focused on business after earning his startup capital, Carrian Group could have genuinely become a powerful company. But perhaps the temptation of quick money clouded his judgment, and he chose to continue his successful methods. Unfortunately, though, if you keep walking on the edge of the cliff, you are bound to fall into the abyss eventually. Alright, that's all for today's video. I once saw a comment said, someone is curious about our feng shui culture. Then let's talk about it in the next video. See you then.